I want to talk a little bit about the people side of things today. And it's really hard in 15 minutes to talk about culture. It's a broad, complex subject, as I'm sure you guys can relate. So what I'm going to try to do is frame up kind of our journey at Georgia Pacific, at least in the consumer product side, of what we're learning as we're trying to have people think about safety as a shared value. So I think the easiest place to start from is the beginning. I joined Georgia Pacific in 2006, and that was right after the Coke acquisition. And one of the nice things about an acquisition is there's, you can imagine, a lot of organizational change. So I was able to spend the first 90 to 120 days going around to our facilities and meeting people, understanding the processes, trying to get a good general lay of the land. And after some of the organizational upheaval has settled down and I had a boss full-time, not 3, not 2, but 1, we got together and said, you know, let's kind of take ourselves through a problem-solving model here and let's think about what we're going to do over the next 5 years. So a couple positives. And Georgia Pacific enjoyed a very good record and a reputation with health and safety. It's the first corporate member of the OSHA Voluntary Protection Program, up to 80 participating sites at one point. Good basic management system in place, very compliance focused. I think the way that I always sum it up for folks was, at the turn of the acquisition, GP was a leader in the forest products industry relative to health and safety. Now, coming forward with the acquisition, expectations changed. And it wasn't, you know, being a leader in the forest products industry was not really kind of what the expectation was anymore. We want to be considered with the best-in-class companies, and we want to be able to have a health and safety record that's indicative of that as well. So as we went through our problem-solving model, some of the things that we learned was we were really tied to these lagging indicators, right? We waited for an injury to happen before we reacted. We didn't look at things that you've heard in the presentations before me, like risk assessments, management systems, near miss or near hits, leading indicators, things that you can do, you can look at before something happens and intervene. And when we did have these things, we didn't necessarily do a great job of getting the root cause. We treated the symptoms. So, you know, you can't paint all of GP with this brush, obviously, but safety was a priority. And what is it about priorities versus values? They change, right? My priority today may be something different than it was yesterday. So it was clear to us that the human action model wasn't really in play. We talk about the human action model, it's really 3 states that people, groups, cultures, businesses have to have in place to take action and to make change. And the first stage of that is you got to be dissatisfied, right? You got to be dissatisfied with that current state. You got to have a vision of what that better state looks like, and you have to have belief that you can get to that vision. So let's do a quick exercise. Dissatisfaction with your current state. How many of us had New Year's resolutions this year? Come on, seriously, come on. That's all, really. I don't believe any of you. How many of those resolutions were looking back at the mirror going, I'm completely dissatisfied with what I see right now? Really? Come on, right? So what did you do? You said, you know what? I'm going to lose 20 pounds, or I'm going to run a marathon. So you had a vision of what you wanted it to be, right? So you had a plan to go with that vision. And then how did you believe that you could get there? Well, you probably weighed yourself or took your body fat weekly. Or maybe that run you were doing, you're doing 2 minutes faster, right? So, I mean, that's generally how it works. Now, that's a very simplistic example. And obviously, in culture, it's not that simple all the time. And one of the difficult things is getting people to this point. Because some of us may look in the mirror and go, looking pretty good, dude, you know? I'm not dissatisfied with anything, right? And so that's a challenge. So, you know, that's where we kind of found ourselves. So what do you say when you, what's your reaction when you see this photo? What's that? Are these guys looking very dissatisfied right now? No. What does it say about maybe their level of risk tolerance? Let me ask you this. In today's society, would we be dissatisfied if we saw this? If you went into your facilities that you're responsible for, would you be dissatisfied if you saw something like this or similar to this? Right. Do we have any of this that still goes on today? Do we still have individuals that maybe still exhibit that risk tolerance? And please understand, I'm not being critical of this photo because this is an extremely historic photo, right? I mean, this is talking about the construction activities of building skyscrapers between 1920 and 1930. I mean, there's a really cool presentation that goes with this. So I'll tell you that that's kind of what I learned as I moved around Georgia-Pacific, and I really thought that I had a good handle on culture. I mean, one, background in psychology that kind of got me into this field. I've been fortunate enough to work in some of the most hazardous industries that we have in the world. I've been able to do a lot of that outside the United States. But the lesson that I'm getting around culture, you learn daily. You don't ever have it figured out. If you do, see me after this and we'll talk. But so as we moved around and developed our 5-year plan, we were implementing phase one. Phase one really consisted of some of the things that you heard the presenters prior to me, risk assessment. And it wasn't so much process-based risk assessment, it was more of man-machine interaction. So as we started this initiative, let me just say it like this. Not everybody was completely aligned with our vision, right? So some of the things that we heard as we moved from facility to facility was now a long list of things that we use in a presentation of our own. And this is one of them. So we wanted to teach people how to identify hazards and assess risk. We didn't want to build teams and technical experts that did it for the organization. So some of the operators, as we came around, said, we don't need to do this. I mean, our safety method is being faster than the machine. So after I heard this about 4 or 5 times, I finally asked one of the gentlemen, I said, well, what happens if you're not? He goes, oh, well, you're like this guy. He waves to us. He's got a couple of his digits missing. Or you don't work on this part of the machine anymore. You move to something else because you can't keep up. Well, what does that say about their risk tolerance? What does it say about the organization's risk tolerance? Some of us told us, well, you're probably going to get away with this initiative, but do me a favor, Bill. Build me a safety system that when stuff hits the fan, I can bypass, right? Because at 2 a.m. in the morning, when the machine's not running the way that I want it to run, I need to be able to bypass all the safety stuff so I can get to what I need to do, right? So what does that say about their value? What do they value there? They value safety, they value production. This is one of my favorites. We don't need to guard the machine because we do it differently than the other mills. I mean, we had locations that would say, look, I understand why you're over here and why you're at this mill. We do it differently. You don't need to mess with us. What does that say about humility? What does that say about our maybe lack of vulnerability, right? So this is some of the things that we learned as we went through our system and we talked to folks. But this is all good stuff. I mean, you can't be in this field and look at this and be dejected because people were telling you and pointing to exactly where the problem was. So a vision of a better state. So where does that start with us? Well, it's certainly more comprehensive than what I'm going to be able to explain to you today, but for us it starts with 10 principles. And I'm going to speak to 4 of these. They're divided into really 3 tiers, and the first tier are integrity and compliance. I think those speak for themselves, right? They're the foundation of the 10 elements. There's absolutely no conflict between the 8 other principles and these 2. These 2 always win. We're going to be lawful, we're going to be honest, we're going to be compliant. We're going to follow the law, we follow our internal procedures. The second tier is made up of one element, and that's value creation. And the first 2 principles are necessary, but they're not sufficient for success. And for us, this is where kind of the rubber meets the road. And the way that we look at it is that value creation starts by earning the opportunity to operate facilities by demonstrating that you can do it with health and safety and environmental excellence. Right? So we think about creating value for society. We think about eliminating waste. Health and safety has something to do with that. What many people don't realize, and we probably initially didn't do a good enough job explaining to folks, is that when you're going around doing man-machine interface risk assessments, it's not a safety initiative. It's a reliability initiative. The things that they see that are manifested as hazards or safety issues are reliability issues. And selling it that way and talk about process improvements really kind of changed the face of what we were trying to do. And then finally, principled entrepreneurship.